Hi, this is Carla, the crazy cross stitch lady. I am back again for another tutorial. We're continuing to create this, what's going to be our cupcake. And let me see if I can pull that camera back just a little bit. Last time I had some issues with my table shaking, and one of the legs, I don't know, this is an old table. It was from our old house, and so it's found its way into my craft room, and I have stabilized it. I have also stabilized the camera stand a little bit more, so hopefully we will not have as many camera shaking issues as we did in the last video. So I have stitched these three. So now I'm going to continue. I've already skipped these two, and now I'm going to do 4. And I'm going to go ahead and just stitch the row. And I will, since you're getting the hang, hopefully, of following the pattern, I'll just show you each row before I stitch it now. And we'll just keep stitching all the way down until we finish with our purple part. And I will answer some questions as I am stitching. Okay, so you'll just kind of watch me. I'll be stitching this, and I'm going to follow the pattern here in the background. I'm just going to keep going and answer questions as we go. All right, so this is, can you travel with your cross-stitch projects? Okay, yes, you can. And part of that also depends on where you decide to travel and how you decide to travel. When I go on longer trips, especially during the summer, I like to go on trips, and I usually am driving. I don't usually fly wherever I go. Part of the trip for me is driving and seeing the countryside. One of my goals is to visit all 50 states. Right now I'm at 26, and so I want to actually see the state that I am visiting. Notice I'm stitching just a little bit faster now that you see how it goes. So I don't stitch super fast. I'm not a fast stitcher, but I am going to start stitching this just a little bit faster, not go quite so slowly, because you get the rhythm of it now. So anyway, probably the trickiest part of traveling with your cross stitch is if you go on a plane. When you go on an airplane, there are buku travel restrictions, and what you can and can't take on board, and what you can put in your carry-on luggage and what you can't, and so on and so forth. So what I usually do, because you never know whether an airline is going to be okie dokie with you carrying your needles and scissors on board the plane, or if they're going to confiscate them from you. I've had both those things happen to me. So it depends on the airline. It depends on the people who are working at security and all that stuff. So here's what I do. If I'm going to travel on plane, I want to take my stitching with me. What I found is they don't really care that you've got fabric and thread with you. They don't care about your project itself. Your project's not going to do anything. If they're going to have a fit about anything, it's going to be your needle, because I guess we're going to tickle people to death with this or not, but it's got a sharp point, so who knows. But it's going to be the needle and scissors that they have a fit about. So what I do is I make sure that in my carry-on, I make sure that my stitching is in its own little travel case, and I've got travel cases for mine, and you can buy them from Michael's or what have you. They have all kinds of carrying cases that you can use for your needlework. So I will put a couple of needles in my carry-on, and I will make sure that I have a cheap pair of scissors. So, it's not going to be my sewing scissors. It's going to be, maybe a pair like this that I don't really care that much about. If I lose it, they confiscate it. It's really not that big of a deal. That goes in my carry-on. My better scissors, if I want to take better scissors with me in the first place, will be going to the packed luggage. So, well, if I can find... This is always an interesting adventure to try to find it through the camera. Okay. I'm getting better at it, though. I'm getting a little more used to it. But that's what I do so that I have supplies with me, and if some of my supplies get confiscated by the TSA, oh well, you know, I just won't get to stitch on the plane. That would be the biggest, you know, my biggest setback is just not getting to stitch on the plane, and I lose a cheap pair of scissors in the process. I'm always up front with them, though. When I have my carry-on, I always tell them that I have my cross-stitching with me, that I do have a needle and a pair of sewing scissors, and ask them, is that okay? I think they appreciate me being upfront about it, and most of the time it's been, yeah, it's fine. It's like, it's not even any big deal to them. You never know, though, when it might be a big deal. So if you do decide to travel with yours on a plane, just to be upfront about it and let them know that that's what you have. If I am traveling in the car, it's not even a big deal at all. I just put it in its carrying case, throw it in the trunk. Well, not throw. We don't throw our cross stitch. But put it in the trunk very nicely. And then, then we travel with it. Okay. It looks like it has helped that I have secured the table, and I've also secured my camera holder, camera stand a little bit better. All right, so I'm coloring in this row just so I can see where I've been. It really is helpful, especially when you start getting into the middle of your stitching and you're like, oh man, what row am I on? Where did I stop? And then you have to look at your stitches and compare it to the chart, and that can be a little bit of a time waster. So anyway, there you go. Okay, do you have to use a hoop or Q-snap? This is a hoop. I don't have my Q-snap with me. Q-snap is, you may have seen them before, and you can easily look it up online. A Q-snap is a plastic square, usually pieces that are made up where you can, you just snap them together, and then you lay your fabric over the square, and then you take these clamps and you clamp them onto your fabric, and then you roll the clamps out to really tighten your fabric. I happen to like Q-snaps better than hoops. One of my friends had introduced me to the Q-snap. I am forever grateful to her. I have not tried using a frame. A frame's another thing you can hold your fabric with. I probably won't. And it's one of those things where people say, well, just give it a try. And most of the time I will give things a chance. I'll give them a try, and I won't just foo-foo it just because I think I might not like it. But in the case of the frame, I just kind of know that I won't like it, and I've seen how it's used, and I've seen what people have to do to get their fabric on there and put it together. And I don't stitch two-handed anyway, which is what most people do when they have the frame. They'll stitch two-handed typically. And I don't know. I may try it at some point. I'm just not really eager to try it right now. And you know what? Again, that's okay. So I'm using a hoop now because this project is a little bit smaller, and sometimes smaller projects or projects where it's where you've done so much sewing, the material starts feeling thick, and so a hoop just you can get a hoop onto your fabric a little bit easier. I'll do it for that. I'm having to do it with my Michael Jackson project. I'm having to use a hoop simply because I have so much stitching done that it's gotten thicker, and it's just easier to get the hoop over all of that stuff. Q-snap's just not cutting it right now, and that's okay. Okay, you notice I'm just checking my pattern. Sometimes you just have to do that when you lose track a little bit. That's why it's there. So you don't have to use anything. I have a student in my club who is not using anything. She likes to stitch by hand. She feels much more comfortable that way. I don't think I've ever seen her use a hoop. I think she tried it the first time I introduced it to her, and that was the end of the story. She has stitched by hand from that point on, and she's made some beautiful stuff. There are other people who like to stitch by hand because they like to use the sewing method. I don't use the sewing method to stitch. Mine's more of like a stick and stab, or stab and stick, or whatever you want to call it. But and I like it because I like the process. I've tried sewing, and the sewing method, I don't enjoy it. It just takes the joy out of it for me because I'm very much a process stitcher. Although there are some process stitchers who like the sewing method, and that's fine. But there are tutorials on YouTube. Of course, you can find them all over the place. Just search for cross-stitch sewing method and try it out for yourself. See if you would like the sewing method, would prefer it to what I'm doing right here. Some people do. There are different ways to stitch. I just happen to prefer this one, so that's exactly what I'm doing. Let's see. So some people prefer just to use a hoop, and that's, pull my thread up here. That's all they want to use is a hoop, and that is fine. Okay, I was going to say, did I have a knot in my thread? Okay, I think I'm okay. Yeah. And sometimes you have to stop. You just have to straighten it out a little bit. It looks like it's still kind of, there we go. It was getting kind of wonky there. Some people, that's all they want to use is a hoop. Again, that's okay. Some people just want to use a Q-snap. Some people, all they use is a frame. So you have to try them out. The only thing I have not tried is the frame. I have stitched in hand, and I'm actually having to stitch in hand for part of my Michael Jackson project because there's a bottom strip that you just can't put a hoop on there because you're only going to be able to get part of it in the hoop the way that it's set up in order for me to get to that part of the material. So it is what it is, and I'm stitching that part by hand. I am not enjoying that part because I feel like I can't get enough tension in my material, my fabric, and I'm someone who really likes having tension. I stitch so much better when my fabric is taut. The needle, I think, goes through the holes a little bit easier, and I can stitch a little bit faster. Although it's not the point for me to stitch faster, I don't care. But it's easier, and I just enjoy it more. Q-snaps are awesome. Frames, the way you have to set them up, or even if you're in your lap, I guess I could do that. You have lap frames, lap stands, and you also have floor stands. But again, look at some tutorials on lap stands and floor stands, and then just see for yourself if that's something that you might be interested in. I don't think, if you want to try it out, I don't think I would be investing tons and tons of money into a stand. You might want to get a cheaper stand first. With Q-snaps and hoops, that's not as much of an issue. You're not really going to have that much money invested if you decide that just wasn't your thing. But just be careful with the lap stands, and I would be spending like $200 on a lap stand or a floor stand if I don't even know whether I'm going to like it or not. Yeah, I guess you could sell it on eBay or Marketplace or somewhere like that. But I'm the kind of person who just doesn't even want that hassle. I've got better things to do than to try to sell things I didn't want after all. So that's just it. So no, you don't have to use anything. You can just do everything by hand, not even worry about any of that stuff. I have a wall full of hoops and Q-snaps because I love them. That's why I have them. Okay, so I'm going to run my needle. Just run it through. You know, I just run it through 4 or 5. Pull it through. So get my little scissors. You're going to cut, just make sure that your tips go past your thread, okay? And then you just cut that as close as you can. You're not going to make the thread come loose or anything. If you secured it under 4 or 5 stitches, you're going to be good to go. Okay, so let me highlight this one. Yes, after securing that table like that, this is much better. Much, much better. Live and learn, I guess. I've been doing a lot of living and learning the past 2 years. I mean, we all have, but I've had to do it not only with life, but in my job as well. Shoo-wee. We've had a big learning curve. So I will tell you that the cross-stitching has been a lifesaver for me. I mean, it's always been a stress reliever, but I have really, really depended on my stitching to get me through this pandemic and through all the stuff that we have to do to get through our job. Okay, I'm going to thread my needle again. And so let's see. Another question. Where can you buy cross-stitch supplies? You can buy cross-stitch supplies in a lot of different places. Michael's will have stuff. Hobby Lobby. I don't go to Hobby Lobby myself. For personal, I have a personal reason for not going to Hobby Lobby. I kind of boycott them, but that's just me. But yeah, if you want to know why, I can tell you. It's for me, it's more like the principle of the thing. But anyway, you can go there. You can go to Walmart. Walmart has some cross-stitching supplies. Joann Fabrics has some too, although their specialty is quilting, and so you're going to be in quilting mega world, but they do have a small cross-stitching section. They do have floss. They have some kits if you're interested in a kit. But let me get my thread straight now here. You can also go online. Some people, you may be lucky and have what we stitchers refer to as the LNS, which stands for Local Needlework Shop. You may have one close to you that you can use, and they specialize in cross stitching, and that's all you see, which is fantastic. If you have a shop, even a shop that's within 30 to 45 minutes, you are a lucky person, because a lot of us don't have that. I do. There's one within probably 45 50 minutes or so. It's in Louisville, which is one of our larger cities in the state. So I've been there. But I also buy a lot of things from 123stitch.com, and let's see, where else? Everything Cross Stitch has some. There are some specialty sites. Artisy is one. I think what I'll do in the description below, I will list different places where you can buy cross-stitch supplies, and that way you will have that at your fingertips should you need it. You can go to Amazon. They'll have some. I wouldn't even really bother a lot with Amazon. Now, Amazon does have some cute kits that you can get, like beginner kits. So maybe you want to try that. And it might be easier to try a kit that already has floss with it, so you don't have to worry about trying to get the floss. But like I said, I'll just put, it might be easier for me just to put a list of the different cross stitch shops. Now, I will say, and I will give them a shout out, if you happen to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or if you are within 30 to 45 minutes of Tulsa, maybe even an hour, make a day of it. Tulsa has an LNS that's called the Silver Needle, and you may have heard of the Silver Needle because the Silver Needle is kind of like the cross stitch mecca in the U.S. A lot of people out of state talk about that. I actually went to a retreat that they had last summer, Silver Needle retreat. It was very nice, and they have such a wide selection of things in their shop. It's just not even funny. But if you are not within like an hour's drive of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is most of us, you can go online. They do have a shop online, so you can go to, or just do Google search for the Silver Needle, because I can't remember if it's the silverneedle.com or what it is, but look for the Silver Needle. And they have pictures of their shop on there, so you will see what I'm talking about. When I first saw those pictures, I thought, I must go there. So I did go. I went one summer when I was taking a trip to do some other things as well. But I stopped in Oklahoma, went to Tulsa, and I went to that needlework shop, and I opened the door, and it was like the angels were singing. It's a fantastic shop. So check out their website. I'll put their website. I'll see if I can find their website and put it down in the description as well, so that you have an idea of where to go. I'll put in Heaven and Earth Designs and all that, because there are some websites, they're strict. They don't sell just any kind of cross stitch stuff, but they have very specific patterns and that kind of thing. So you may be interested in that stuff as well. So I will do that. All right, let me flip my notes over here. Let's see, what size needle do you need? Well, it depends on what size cloth or fabric you are stitching on. Now, if you're stitching on, let's say I'm stitching on this 14 count, and so my needle size, the needle I'm using here, this is a 24. If you stitch on a 16 count, 26, so you kind of see a pattern there with the ending numbers. If you stitch on an 18 count, then 28 would be better, and the larger the number gets, the smaller the needle size. Now, I typically stitch with 24, the size 24 for the most part. Even on my 18 count, I stitch with a 24, and the reason they say don't do that and stitch with a smaller needle is that if you have a larger needle going into smaller holes, guess what happens? It starts to stretch the holes a little bit more than what they would normally get stretched when you put that needle through. And sometimes it looks like it might leave some gaping holes. I have not found that to be the case. When I'm doing my full coverage, which is about the only time I really want to use 18 count because those holes get pretty small, there's so much floss there, so much thread that you don't really see any holes, like bigger holes that I've made. It's just not even an issue with me. Move my scissors here. Okay, about finished with this row. Okay, so let's see. What's the difference between counted cross stitch and stamped cross stitch? All right. Well, what we're doing right now is counted cross stitch. Counted cross stitch is where you actually you don't have anything on the fabric except for these holes, and you have to count so that you can see where your X's should go and how many X's you need for a particular color and that kind of thing. So that's why it's called counted cross stitch. Stamped cross stitch is where you have fabric that has stamped X's on it. The X's are typically blue. I'm not sure. I think it's probably just easier to see, and maybe it washes out easier. But you have blue. Now, I straighten up the stand. I hope the camera's not shaking too much because I really secured that stand better. And what you do is you look at a pattern to see what color the certain X's should be, and you actually stitch over the blue X's where your floss covers the blue X's. So in the case of stamped cross stitch, it's a little easier because you don't have to count. The X's are already in their places and you just stitch over them. But the hard part is that you have to be careful and make sure that your thread, you want to make sure your thread is covering the stitches, at least I do, because they are supposed to wash out when you wash your fabric, but that may not necessarily happen. And so I always, if I'm using stamped cross stitch, I'm always trying to make sure that my floss has completely covered the blue of the X's. I don't do stamped that much. I just haven't. I do have a couple of, like a pillowcase set that I would like to do at some point. I have had quilt blocks that I had a pretty set that had fans on them, and I don't know if I still have them or not. I thought something maybe had happened to them when we moved. You can make pillows with those because it's not, the fabric doesn't have any holes in it. It's just plain fabric. And so they're really nice to stitch up, and then you can stuff them, put a back cover on them and stuff them and make pillows out of them, which is what I had intended to do with the fans, although they were meant to be quilt blocks, so you can stitch them up and actually do some quilting with them. So that's the difference between the two. That's the big difference. So nothing really majorly different about, well, I mean, they're different, but I mean, it's easy to explain the difference between the two. And if you see stamped cross stitch, you're going to know that it's stamped cross stitch. So if I think about it, I may try to get those out maybe during one of my floss tubes or something. Let's see, can I stitch on clothing? Absolutely, you can stitch on clothing. Now, in order to stitch on clothing, if you want it to look right, you need what's called waist canvas. Waist canvas typically, it comes in like a blue and white striped material. The waist canvas has more of a thicker, plasticky kind of feel to it, if that's a word. And the idea is that when you it gives you a grid, and what you do is you whip stitch the canvas onto whatever clothing you're wanting to stitch on. And then you do your stitching and you use that canvas as your grid, so it becomes your Aida cloth basically. And then once you finish stitching, you wet the canvas, and then you just go through each and you slide each thread through, just pull it out from under your stitching, where all you have left is your stitching. Typically, when you're stitching on clothing, it's instead of pulling out one thread at a time. Like I showed you that we're using 6-stranded floss, and so we pulled out one strand and then doubled it up to make 2. You would actually use all 6 strands of floss. You wouldn't pull any out, and that way it makes it a little bit thicker and sturdier to handle being on clothing. And usually when I'm running my thread under the back of it, I run it through, not just 4 or 5 threads, but probably double that just to make sure it stays put. I really still don't want to put knots back there to secure it, so I just run it under more threads to keep it secure. And then you can put some kind of like basting or something like that on inside the shirt on the cross stitch itself, just to help secure it and keep it there. I am not a seamstress. I love to stitch, but I am not much of a seamstress, and so maybe if that's your forte, you would have a much easier time in actually putting a cross stitch design on clothing. I did that one time with somebody's sweatshirt. They asked me to do it, and I was able to do it, but it was an interesting experience. I don't know that I want to do that very often. But you can also stitch on not just shirts, but even tote bags and things like that. So that's pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna finish this stitch and bring it up and have it ready for the next stitch, because we're at our 30-minute mark. So I'm going to leave it like that, and then we will continue. Now, you see how it's starting to take shape. We're seeing the icing on here, so it's going to be cute, I think, when we get finished with it. And it's going to take us a little while, and that's okay. It's okay that it takes us a while to get this done, but I really want you to see this process unfold and take shape, just so you have an idea. And I'll continue answering questions and giving information as much as I can while we are stitching this. So we have come to the end of our time today, but I hope that you are creative and that you are blessed, and I will see you later. Bye.